Kathleen and I and the rest of the team here at NLP Seminars Group International, I would like to welcome you all. I'm John, for those of you who I have not met yet. And I'm not going to take up much of your time here this morning first, because I want to turn this right over to my very favorite guy in the world. Would you please welcome Dr. Richard Bandler.
Well, thanks a lot, John. Good morning. We'd like to welcome you to Orlando if you're not from Orlando already. We've been doing this now for 5 years here, and it's a good place to do seminars. Next 3 days, I want to give you a little preview of coming attractions. Somebody asked me in the lobby last night, they said, what exactly is this course about? And I pointed out to them that they had already signed up for the course. So at this point, it really didn't make a difference. And if they knew what the course was about, they probably wouldn't need to come. That, to me, I've, for almost 30 years now, been studying the art of persuasion and changing beliefs and changing thought patterns. Everything from studying good salespeople to studying shaman, to studying hypnotherapists like Milton H. Erickson and insurance salesmen like Ben Feldman. Guy sells $6 million worth of insurance face-to-face every year. He did it for like 10, 15 years. And we found that when people are really good at convincing, changing beliefs inside of people, that they share certain things in common. In fact, successful people seem to share certain things in common. For one thing, they're able to motivate themselves easily. And they're able to, they're self-starters, they're people that have the ability to take the things that go on inside of their mind and to be able to charge themselves up. But no matter how charged they are, if they can only communicate with a certain percentage of the population, the only way they can increase their income and their successful contact with human beings is to work more hours, to see more people. So what we're really after here is being able to increase the number of people that you can effectively communicate with. Because I know that you people come from lots of different professions, that there are people here that are salesmen and people that are managers and people that run businesses, and I'm sure there's some psychotherapists hidden out here. They sneak in every seminar I do. I could do one on how tires work, and I'm sure there'd be therapists in it. I did a sales course once in San Francisco, and somebody raised their hand and they said, can you explain to me how you work with insomniacs? And I said, what the hell does that have to do with sales? And they said, well, I'm a psychiatrist. And I said, well, next week I'm doing a course on hypnotherapy, and last week I did one on personal change. And he said, oh, but those didn't fit into my schedule. However, the brochure was so tempting he couldn't pass it up. He said, I really want to know about this, but I can't go to what's relevant. Now, some years ago, I did it. You'd be surprised. Being a psychiatrist is a dangerous profession. You listen to too many crazy people. Take it from me, I know. Somebody once asked me in an audience, they said to me, when you go into a mental hospital and you've worked with these really severely crazy people, you know, what do psychiatrists think about it? And I said, well, those are the psychiatrists, as far as I can tell. See, it was amazing to me when I started out that there were two things that really stood out in my mind. One was the field of psychology had absolutely no technology whatsoever represented in any of the literature. That there wasn't anything that somebody could go into a therapist and be predictably walking out without. If they lacked confidence, there was no guarantee they would get confidence. Even the therapists who were successful people had no idea how they were doing it and had rules against knowing what they were doing. Now, you could get a degree, a PhD in psychology, but yet you couldn't get a degree in sales, the largest profession on the face of the earth, and there were more people that knew exactly what they were doing. I mean, some of them, like the first sales training course that I took was through an encyclopedia company. I was in college, and they gave us a thing and told us to memorize it and to go knock on the door and just do things. The first thing they said was to say our name clearly, introduce ourselves, have a firm handshake, and to comment on the blue marlin on the wall. Now, at the time, I didn't realize that that was an idiom that meant comment on something that you share in common. But being a pretty good hypnotist, I managed to get almost everybody to see a blue marlin. Probably people sitting around now still talking about the blue marlin that came with the encyclopedias they bought. Now, over the years, I've done lots and lots of strange things. Tried to take the techniques that came from one field and apply them to another. I literally took the equations that used to build bridges and found a way to help people so that they could get rid of compulsions. And because to me, all the things that people do to mentally process, this company is running so efficiently with and it's got a high profit margin, and it's growing wildly, and it's driving the other airlines out of business. And rather than learning from it, they want to stamp out this kind of efficiency. You know, it would be like as if the government, and I almost feel this way when I had a company here in the U.S. It's like the government sent down people to see how inefficient you can run your business. They were always telling me things like I had to punish my employees and take things out of their check for needs they didn't have, and all kinds of things, and complicated things about things. I had a beautiful pension plan, and then they passed a law that said we couldn't use it. And when I was doing it, we actually put aside large parts of the money in deferred income, and then invested it so that what they had to set aside, I was investing for them, and I did pretty good at that. You know, it worked out pretty well. I played the stock market. I wasn't like Martha Stewart. I didn't have inside information. I just did it by watching the things go up and down. And when they go down, I buy it, and when they go up, I sell it. And, you know, and I do it like every 3 or 4 minutes, though. I didn't do it, you know, on a long-term basis. But if you really watch the stock market, you can do something. But if you turn away and have a drink of iced tea, your fortune can be gone. Especially nowadays, because they're making up these companies. I can't believe what these CEOs have done to some of these giant companies. It's one thing to mess around with a little company, but start messing around with these billion-dollar companies. And this poor head of Enron, you know, who left and bought himself a $5 million house, had $5 million in cash to make bail. Now, if you think, I started thinking about it. Michael Jackson, child molestation charges, that was like, you know, pretty expensive, I thought, for him. But I just wonder if they're going to send 70 police over every time they think somebody's mistreating their kids. They sent 70 policemen to his house. They seem to be picking on celebrities for some reason, want to make an example out of them. But the Enron guy could get 312 years in prison. I just don't see how you could serve 312 years. Is his skeleton going to lay there? I don't know what the logic behind this is. You know, I mean, a life sentence should be like as long as you live. I mean, that should be enough. But 312 years is what they're going for. You know, I could just see the prosecutor, you know, when they said, well, you know, we could get him for 98 years. And he's going, that's not enough. He should be punished. Recently, I got a ticket. I was in a foreign country, and I was in Ireland, and I got a ticket. But I didn't get the ticket from a policeman, like, you know, here they just hand you the ticket. I got it 2 years later in the mail. Apparently, a camera snapped me in a rent-a-car going over the speed limit, and the local Gardaí, you know, came and told me, gave me a summons, and I went to court and sat there for hours, listening to the most unpersuasive people you could possibly imagine. They came up with every lie you could think of, one right after the other. And this judge was not into it at all. No matter what they said, he would punish them even more. This one guy said, well, you know, the camera that shot in the car, I said, I'd already sold my car. You know, I couldn't be responsible. And he said, okay, I'll let you off of that, but I'm going to fine you 6 times as much for not reporting the sale of your car. Just caught him on that end, and he was just punishing everybody and charging them a lot of money. And I was late for my plane, and I kept looking at it going, this is going to take forever. And they kept dragging out with these long Irish explanations, you know, about how relatives died, and they went on and on and on, you know, and the roads were too wet, and you know, and I mean, why they couldn't get to court, and why they had missed this, and why they didn't have insurance. And one guy, I love this, actually got a drunk driving charge pushing his car. He was so drunk he couldn't drive, but he didn't want to leave his car at the bar, so he just got behind the wheel and the door and started pushing it down the equivalent of our freeway. And when the policeman pulled him over, he said that he wasn't driving, and the policeman said, look, he said, moving your car on the road, that counts. And so to try and persuade the policeman not to give him a ticket, he told him to feck off 127 times. What I like is that the policeman counted, you know. I had to be a really calm chap to sit there, you know, and the guy goes, feck off, and he goes, that's one. He goes, I'm still giving you a ticket. He goes, well, feck off, that's two. And when this guy got up in front of the judge, he said, I was trying not to drive drunk. I was, because I was walking, I wasn't driving. And he had a friend with him who was also drunk that was also pushing the car. And he also got a ticket because they were both operating a motor vehicle. And you can only go so fast on foot. And, you're supposed to be going faster than that on the freeways. They call them carriageways there. And so here they are at 3 in the morning pushing this car down the road as fast as their little feet could carry them drunk. And they were still having trouble staying in the lane, apparently. And this guy tries to cop to this judge. And this judge, if you just sat there for a few minutes, there was no way this guy was going to go along with any story you told him. Because the more they lied, the more he charged them. And I mean, one guy got charged that, equivalent to about $900 US, when the fine would have only been 80. If he would have just said, I'm guilty, they'd have charged him $80. But the guy just kept giving a bigger and bigger line, and he didn't have the feedback to look at this judge, which is shaking his head no. The more he lied, the more he shook his head no. And finally they called out my name, and I just stood up, and he said, is there a Dr. Bandler here? And I stood up and I said, yes. And he said, what exactly are you a doctor of? And I said, well, I'm a doctor of words. I have a doctor of letters. And I said, if somebody has a really sick H, I can heal it. And he said, how do you plead? And I went, guilty, guilty, guilty. I should be punished. Suddenly his whole demeanor changed. And he said, come on up here. And he said, why were you going too fast? And I said, because I thought I could. That's why. I said, there was space, it was open in front of me, and I stepped on the accelerator, I went too fast. And he said, they caught you on the camera doing 65 in a 50-mile-an-hour zone. And I said, well, freeways in the United States are usually 65 miles an hour, so I probably thought I was on a freeway. I said, I'm sure the policeman's right. I'm sure you're right. I'm guilty and I should be punished. Guilty, guilty, guilty. And so he didn't find me. Now there's a lesson in this, by the way. The more I watched how this guy responded with a polarity when people said they were innocent, he went, they were guilty. Even the policeman one time, he said, do you have the report on this guy? And he said, the report's in another set of files. And he fined the policeman. And I thought, this is a grouchy judge. I said, so what are we going to do? What I'm going to do is I'm going to be meaner to myself than he can be. And what happened is that when you find people who are serious polarity responders, now I guess it was about 25 years ago, ran an experiment. There were 2 furniture stores on either side of a freeway. And they were both big, gigantic furniture stores, and the guy that owned both of them, they were the same furniture store. The only reason he had 2 is if you missed the turnoff to get off to one, you couldn't really go to the other one. You'd have to go like miles and miles and miles. So, to sell more furniture, he built another store on the other side of the road. And he went in and he said, look, if you can do sales training for 1 day with my people and increase their sales, he said, then we'll give you this big contract. So I went in and I figured in 1 day what could be the things that I could teach them. And the first one I taught them is the simplest lesson of all. If people come in and you say, what are you after? That's different than if you say, what are you looking for? Because if you ask them what they're looking for, you're assuming that they make visual images and they'll go and think. But as they stop and ask the vague question, what are you after? If they stop and go, let's see, it tells you that they're making visual images and, trying to find something to match. And if you don't have that in your store, you're going to be in trouble. So it makes a lot of sense to put something up there other than what they have. And if you watch where their eyes move and you listen to their language, they'll use words like look and see and show and imagine and perspective. Whereas some people will come in and when you say, what are you after? They go, well, I feel I need a couch, my old couch is just getting a little rough around the edges, and I'm looking for something that's soft and smooth. And when people use kinesthetic predicates, if you use kinesthetic predicates, they feel better. Now the same thing is true when you have people that when you say, what are you after? And they stop and their eyes shift down and to the left, and you pretty much know they're talking to themselves. One of the things to do, by the way, is to not interrupt them, but to stick things in. That's what I do. I stop and I say to yourself, and fill in the blank. I'll stop and say, like somebody like Robert here, I'd say, I stop and I say to yourself, Robert, I really need a whole new living room. And they would go, yeah, maybe I do need a whole new living room. Right? And I go, well, if I show you something that you haven't seen before that makes you feel good, then maybe you'll change it. And maybe you just wanted a couple of chairs. But, maybe you should do something where you get where you treat yourself a little better. Do you see my point? You always get a yes to that, by the way. One of the things that's a good thing, I always found out that if you kind of stack yeses on top of each other, they build up after a while. Now, when we ran this experiment, it turned out I only got 3 hours because of the nature of the business that they were in. And I told them about visual predicates, and then I asked them, I said, what's the most difficult thing you have to deal with? And they told me, they said, well, a lot of people bring somebody in with them that thinks that they're an expert on furniture. And it's like, not only do I have to sell, this one guy, which would be easy, but his friend is always, telling him, well, we better go somewhere else and look around, or I know I could get you a better deal, or this isn't the right thing for you. And, and what I don't know how to do is how to get rid of the friend. And I said, maybe you're not thinking about this right. If you got 2 people there, you should be able to sell 2 things instead of 1. It's one thing, if you just had the right approach and expanded your thinking. Because you see, some people are good at closing propositions, even in negotiations. I did a thing where I negotiated for some stewardesses, and they had all these lawyers, and the lawyers were all fighting with the lawyers from the airline, and everybody was fighting with everybody, and they had giant stacks of papers arguing over details of things. But it really boiled down to the fact that they wanted more money and they wanted more benefits, and the airline wanted to cut down the amount of money they were giving them and give them less benefits. And rather than talking about it in simple terms like that, they had all these lawyers disguising it. Now, when I was brought into the negotiation, the lawyer just was fed up with trying to talk to the other people, so he brought me in and I sat down. They had 16 lawyers, and they even cut the legs off of our chairs so we would feel smaller. As a negotiating tool, that might work with some people, but that's the kind of thing where I think these guys are not really, sort of equipped with powerful tools when they literally think, let's go in the night ahead of time and saw the legs off the chairs. That'll make us feel more powerful. See, I could go inside my head and make a couple pictures and feel more powerful. If I need more energy, I get it from the inside. When it comes to doing conviction, I do it on the outside. So as I walked up to these guys and I sat down and I looked at them and I said, you guys are lawyers. I said, I'm not a lawyer. I said, I'm not as educated in persuasion and these kinds of things, so we'll have to reduce things to terms that are just a little bit simpler. And I went through each of the points of the thing and I read it out loud, and I said, you guys are in different positions. And I'd look at them and I'd say, now, you claim that there's no way that you can give these poor stewardesses and stewards a raise. I said, and I looked at them and I went, now in every language on the face of the earth, when people raise their eyebrows, it's an unconscious cue that says it's the other guy's turn to talk. So when I just stopped and raised my eyebrows, they wanted to say something. And in that position, they'd go, well, yes, we really don't have the money in our budget for a raise. And I'd go. And they go, unless we were to this. And I go. And after 4 or 5, 6, 7 minutes, they'd be bursting out with opportunities. They actually ended up offering more money than we were after. And my negotiating tool was just raising my eyebrows, that one little piece. Now, when you're involved in any kind of persuasion, by the way, for those of you, who have argued and argued and argued with people over the years, sometimes it's not the amount of words that you use. And when I was a musician, I used to fire guitar players if they had the belief that a good solo put as many notes as possible into it. It's not how many notes you use, it's how well you use them. To me, the same thing is true about language. It's true about words, it's true about your body gestures, and it's true about having the sequence of knowing where you're starting and where you're going to. I went into a stereo store in San Francisco when DAT machines first came out, and I wanted a digital auditory thing. There was an ad in the paper, for one. I went down, looked, and it was on the shelf, and I said to the salesman, "I want to buy this machine." And he said, "Well, let's hold on a second." And I thought, gee, that seems like the point where you should close the sale. I mean, it doesn't really seem like the point where you should start negotiating. And he said, "This may not be right for you." And I went, "Okay," and I walked out of the store. And he went running after me. He said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going to a store where they'll sell me where I want." And he said, I'm willing to sell it to you." And I thought, "Well, I don't want it anymore. You talked me out of it. You said it might not be the right machine for me." And he said, very flustered, he said, "Look," he said, "people come in here all day buying things and thinking they want them, and lots of them don't end up buying it." And I said, "I believe you." I said, "By the way, can I speak to your manager? I think I know where I can get a job." Because the most fascinating thing of all is there was an entire wall of televisions. I mean, there had to be 1,000 TVs on the wall, all playing a commercial for a different store. Well, they had it hooked up to cable. Here I was at the Good Guys, and here was the ad for Circuit City. And so as I stood there and the guy was giving me frustration, I kept looking up, thinking about the other store. So I went to the manager, I said, "I'd like to point out two things. One, if you're going to have people selling things, you should teach them how to. This guy won't let me buy a product." And the manager looked at him and said, "Why won't you let this guy buy what he wants?" And he goes, "Well, I wasn't going to stop him from buying it. I was just going to point out the other models we had." And I said, "Yeah, but I want that one." And he said, "Well, yes, it might not be the best value for money." And I said, "See, he won't let me buy it." I said, "When the sale is done, you're supposed to stop." And it's not just stereo people that do this. I've seen this with people. They negotiate their way out of things. Once they get what they want, they don't know how to go, "Okay, it's over with. Time to stop, move on to the next step." Now, I went to probably about 60 or 70 different sales training courses to find out what people did. Some of them had like 3 language patterns. There's Tommy Johnston. He knew about tag questions, didn't he? So he knew that you could pace both sides of a dilemma by using words like, "Well, you say you can't afford this. Can you?" And it embeds that command and opens up the door so that when people are fighting with themselves, you can be on both sides. There was interesting things. There was all of them had this thing that said long steps. There was one where you had to get attention, and then you had to this, and then you had to that, and you had to this, and you had to that. My sales training course is a lot easier. Induce a state of want and desire, point, person, and product. Because to me, if you can do that, you pretty much can sell people pretty much anything. Now also, you have to be able sometimes to induce doubt. Because when people are certain, people's certainty, a lot of times will stop you from even being able to open the door to start something. Now, I had a friend whose dad owned a car lot, a Mercedes lot, back during the big OPEC oil crisis, when people decided that they couldn't buy cars that used gasoline. Funny how the gasoline is everywhere now, that it's more expensive. But at the time, people believed there'd never be gasoline again. So they were all running out and buying Toyotas, and literally for 2 months they hadn't sold a car. And I went down and I said, "Look," I said, "I need a hobby." And I'm not really into golf or tennis. I said, "Can I sell cars?" And his dad said, he said, "You have to have a license." He said, "You could sell the car, but somebody else has to fill out the paperwork." And he said, "Let me introduce you to the guys that work for me." And I have to tell you, it was one of the most depressing places I've ever been in. The salesmen were there, face down on the desk, right? They introduced me, and they looked at me, and he goes, does he want to buy a car?" And he said, "No, he's here to sell cars." And they went, well, there's already 5 of us and we can't sell any cars. And I looked around, here are all these big, beautiful cars. And I thought, Jesus, that's weird. And I said, can I have the keys to this nice 450 SLC? And the guy said, well, yeah. And I said, all right. I said, I'll be back in a few minutes. And I left. I came back 45 minutes later with 3 people who wanted to buy the car. Because obviously there was no one on the car lot buying cars. So I figured the first thing I had to do was leave. It just made sense to me. So I brought them in and I gave each of the salesmen somebody, and they sat down and started filling out the paperwork. And we did a little negotiating on price, but mostly these guys weren't worried about the price. They just were dead set on buying the car. And the salesman almost undid the whole thing. And one of the guy goes, well, why do you want the car now? And the guy goes, because I love this car. This car will make me happy. And finally, one of the salesmen took me aside and he said, Richard, where did you find these people? And I said, at the country club, of course. I said, who the hell else can afford one of these cars? I went into the country club, I parked the car out in front of the bar, opened all 4 doors, walked inside, and said, who here wants to be happy for the rest of your life? Very few people that would say, nah, fuck, I tried that before. My last life, I was happy the whole time, man, and I still died, I had people raise their hand. I said, well, come with me. And I went out and I pointed at the car. And immediately they said, oh, I'd love to drive a car like that. But, the price of gas. And I said, well, yeah. I said, the price of gas. I said, the price of gas, big deal. I said, you either can afford gas for your car or you can't. But, if you go out and you spend $15,000 on a Toyota, 2 years later, you have nothing. You buy a nice Mercedes, 10 years down the road, it'll be worth what you paid for it or more. I said, it's not just one car. I said, you're buying a lifetime of cars. You'll be able to sell this car and buy another beautiful car. You'll have a whole lifetime of beautiful automobiles for the rest of your life, and the price of gas will go up and down. But it's not going to be the determining factor. I said, if you're trying to save money on gas and you don't think about little things, I said, by the way, because I tried something. I went across the street from his car lot, and there was a Toyota lot and some other Japanese car lot, and they had balloons and flags out. People were walking all over the place. And I just stood on the sidewalk, watched the people going by, and as they went by, I'd go, hi. I go, you going to buy one of these cars? And they go, well, I'm seriously thinking about it. And I go, I said, well, you don't have children then, do you? And they went, what? And I said, if you have children? They go, yeah. And I go, well, you don't like them then. And they go, I love my children. I go, come on. I said, can't you just see when this Toyota gets hit by another car and your kid's head is smashed in and his arm is broken, and you're saying, gee, I saved a little money on gas? I said, how are you going to feel then? And they go, well, I never thought about that. And I go, come with me. Because I found behind this car lot a treasure trove of Cadillacs and Lincoln Continentals, all 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, sitting in the weeds. And I went and asked the guy, I said, what's with all the cars out there? And he said, you can never sell those. He said, the gas guzzlers, the days of the gas guzzler are over. And so there was a little Mexican guy that worked there, and so I made a deal with him. I said, you cut the weeds down, detail the cars, and I'll split my profit with you. And he looked at me and he went, what profit? Are you going to sell these cars? I said, come on. I said, watch this. Somebody's going to spend $15,000 to $20,000 for a Toyota when they can spend $3,000 and have a Lincoln Continental. That's a lot of money left over for gas. You think about it, we could put an extra gas tank in there, put a 100-gallon tank. I think they have power windows, leather seats, and if they get hit by a Toyota, they'll be able to brush it off with a cloth, And the salesman told me I was nuts, just absolutely nuts. Their belief system said you cannot sell these kinds of cars because of the economic times. But you see, it didn't stop me from doing it because I didn't believe it. I've convinced schizophrenics that we're floridly hallucinating, right? That that it was better to become normal today, just like that, by stepping inside of their hallucinated reality and making it more real. Because you see, whenever you're negotiating, whenever you're persuading, if you get stuck on one little point and go head to head, but when you make things bigger than they are, it always leaves room for leverage. Now, when I had a schizophrenic that said that the devil was talking to him, and that he spoke to the devil every night, and the devil would come in, and they'd find him screaming in his little room. They'd sedate him to keep him quiet so he didn't disturb the other patients. That's a very helpful thing. I think people who are nuts, you know, who decided that to give nutty people drugs was a good idea. Because in the 60s, we tried that. It didn't work. You know, I had nutty friends, and they would go out and take drugs. They'd just get nuttier. And it didn't matter which drugs they took. In some cases, they didn't even care. Decision strategies are the basis of what we're talking about. People have ways in which they decide which things they want and which things they don't want, and which things they're willing to believe and which ones they're not going to believe, and they're not cast in stone. These are things that if you understand how people do it, you can actually engineer better decisions for people than they'll make for themselves. Now, there's only one rule in this, which is that you're selling something that you think is worth selling. Because if you have skills and you're selling something you don't believe in, then you should go sell something else. You'll make a lot more money. And by the way, if you're selling something that doesn't have a very good profit margin in it, that's not a very good idea. You should sell something you can make some money off of. One of the wealthiest salesmen I met sold jets. Now, the same place he worked at, there were 10 other guys, and he sold more jets than all of the other guys put together. And one of the reasons he did that was because he believed that he could. He had a powerful belief. He had convinced himself, he had persuaded himself that he could go places, walk in the door, and sell people a jet. And he would go to corporations, and he wouldn't even call ahead of time. And he would think to sell a jet, he'd want to make an appointment ahead of time. But this guy would just go in and find out who the chairman of the board was, who the CEO of the company was, and he would just walk up to him and he said, "I need to speak to you." And the person would say, "Well, you need to make an appointment." And he said, "Well, if I make an appointment on my private jet, will you talk to me?" And they would go, "Private jet?" And they go, "Yeah, I got it right out at the airport. I'd like to show it to you." Next thing you know, he'd be having lunch with them on the jet, take him and fly him up around in the circles and go somewhere, show him all the nice things. And while he was up there, he'd show them how they could lease it, how they could deduct it. He knew all the things about how to make it economically worth their while. You know, explain to them you can either give it to the government and they can buy a ballistic missile, or you can have a corporate jet and deduct it. You choose. I know I've already bought several atomic bombs myself. First few years of my career, I was doing really well, but I turned around and looked at the end of the year, and actually I thought I was pretty much paying for the White House. But it requires a couple of things. I mean, this guy had really good sensory acuity to be able to know when he was getting the responses he wanted, and to know what to do when he wasn't. And it wasn't because he had a theory. Because I know a lot of sales training programs, they give you a nice booklet, and it says, you know, first you have to get people's attention. That's an easy one. Show them money. Ben Feldman, who was that top insurance salesman, in the cover of his book, he had loosely stuck inside there $4 or $500 bills, $4 or $5 $50 bills, $4 or $5 $20 bills, and I got 15 $5 bills. And when he'd open the book, they'd just flop out onto the table. And people would stare at it like this. So he had their attention. Simple. I used to try crazier things. Sometimes I would just dress up as a priest. So I went to the costume store, and I was the priest that sold cars. You get really interesting responses from people when you walk up to them and you go, "Son, so you're looking for a car?" And they'd go, "Yes, Father." And they go, "Well, let me show you something." And they go, you know, because here's the priest with the Jewish accent. Natural combination. But they would always say things like, "Well, why are you selling cars?" And I go, "Well, someone needs to. Everybody needs to have a car. You know, I like to fill people's needs." Now, I also had people that came in that would look at cars, and it was just the wrong car. I mean, I had a guy come in, and he looked at a two-seater sports car that cost about $45,000. And this was 30 years ago. And I said to this guy, I said, "Do you have a family?" And he said, "Yes, I have 6 children." And I said, "And a wife?" And he said, "Yeah." Actually, he had 2 wives. One he lived with and one he just paid. But I said to him, "Do you have another car that you're planning to keep?" And he said, "I have that." And I looked over, and he had that old Volvo station wagon with the wheels falling off of it. It wasn't that old, probably 6 months. But I said to this guy, I said, "Look," I said, "if I sell you this car," I said, "where are you going to put your kids?" And he went, well, he said, I thought I'd just keep the station wagon. I said, I thought you didn't like the station wagon. And he said, well, it's not that I don't like the station wagon. He said, I don't like this station wagon. And I said, well, maybe what we should do is get you some other kind of car. I said, come with me, and we got in the Mercedes, and we drove over to another car lot. And I took him inside, and we found the car that I thought was perfect for him, a big Country Squire station wagon, and with that aluminum block V8, and it was an Oldsmobile in those days. Very, very fast for a station wagon. It's one of the biggest production engines that they had built. And I sat down, and I negotiated with the salesman for him. Now, one of the things that I've always had an advantage over car salesmen in this country is that I can read lips. I didn't do it on purpose. I had some hearing difficulty at one time, and I did it out of necessity. But it does come in handy when you watch them through the window, and they go in and talk to each other about how they're going to take advantage of you. And when they come out, you repeat it to them. Verbatim, because they're always going, checking to see if you put some kind of a bugging equipment in their office, But I negotiated a really good deal for this guy. He got the car, and he kept saying, why are you doing this? And I said, because now you owe me. And he said, what? And I said, are you happy with what I did? And he said, yeah. And I said, now, I lost the sale. I could have sold you the wrong car, so you have to find other people who will come down here and buy cars from me. And he went, I do? And I said, of course you do. I said, otherwise you'd feel horrible every time you looked at your car. And I don't want you to have to feel bad when you look at your car. I want you to feel delighted. And every time you look at it, think who else you could send to me. Because I won't take advantage of them. I didn't take advantage of you. Now, it's been 30 years, and I still get calls from the guy who's the car lot because people won't buy cars without me okaying the deal. I got a call about 6 months ago, and he goes, there's one guy who bought a Mercedes. It's now on his 5th Mercedes, and he still every time has to check with me to make sure that it's okay. And to me, this is an important thing, because when you're in a business, you want to build up the kind of loyalty that makes it so that as time goes on, you do less work, not more. The big mistake is that people don't increase the number of people they can close deals with. And this is especially true if you're a manager, because you're not just selling something and then it's over with. You have to do it every day. So if you have 4 or 5 people you can really communicate with, but you have 30 working for you, then maybe you can really get these motivated and you can get these to carry out your instructions. But what's stopping you from doing the others is not something with them. Because as soon as you build the belief that if you vary your behavior, you can be able to communicate with a wider range of people, increase your close ratio, make it so that you'll be able to negotiate with a wider range of people, be able to motivate a wider range of people. What's going to happen is then you can start to focus on what I think is a good model, which is to be able to cut down the amount of time you work by at least half and increase your income by at least 4 times. When you have that in mind as the structure of what you're doing, then you have to become more efficient, which means you need to be able to do things in less time, and you have to find ways of being able to make sure that you don't have to increase the number of leads or the number of people. You don't have to keep firing people and training them. You can find ways of adjusting your own behavior to communicate with them. Now, I have to admit some people are just a pain in the ass and aren't worth that. But percentage-wise, that's not that big a percentage. I think that what happens is that most people are locked in to the way in which they think, and they don't know much about checking how other people think so that they can put things inside of their mind in the way that's easy. Now, I have a little experiment. By the way, some of you are going to try and take notes. I don't think that'll help you here. Let's do it with raw experience, because if you have to pull out your notebook when you go out in the field, then you'll be like me selling encyclopedias, where I pulled out the thing and I said, hi, it's very nice to meet you. My name is blank. And by the way, that's a beautiful blue marlin you have on the wall. Would you like some encyclopedias? But see, what really will work is if you start to compare the difference between how you think about things, because all the things that have to do with building beliefs, persuading people. If I can persuade the schizophrenic, right, to get out of the hospital and live a normal life, as I did for 20 years. Now, I went to great lengths to do it. I wouldn't have to work as hard as I did then, but in those days, I owned a research and development company. So I had the boys bring down a laser. And we brought down a fog machine, and as night, and I had to fix up his room a little bit. It's a nice thing about having a few physicists to work for you. We put in some mechanical stuff. The movie The Exorcist had just been out for a while. Gave me some good ideas. And as the night, well, it did, as the night fell, you know, because I walked out, I thought that movie was one of the funniest movies I ever saw, and everybody else looked like a whiter shade of pale. They bought into all of that. It just scared the crap out of people. Yeah, it was like that movie Jaws. I got so much business from that movie, you wouldn't believe it. There were people who wouldn't take a shower in Kansas. I mean, phobia installation, man, a powerful piece of work, you know. I had them lined up outside. I used to do just groups of phobias. I mean, you know, there was people, you know, there was a company that I was a consultant for that had diving equipment that was doing about $100 million worth of business a year. And when Jaws came out, the next year they did 16 million. I mean, it just, bam, knocked the bottom out of it. And it kept getting worse because it kept coming out with more and more of these movies. Every sequel that came out. And they actually participated in the production of the movie. I mean, this is not thinking. Now, there's also some things that people are just not paying attention to. I saw a commercial on TV. You guys will love this. They describe these beautiful appliances, and then they stopped and put up a big sign and said out loud, "No interest until 2005." And I lost interest immediately. I mean, you know, when I worked for an advertising agency, it was amazing how many of the commercials they put out absolutely gave people amnesia for the product. There was one of the guys at the ad agency said they had made this commercial, and theoretically, according to their theory, it should have really been able to been something that people could remember. And when they had a kind of scoring they called Burt scores, where the Nielsen scores measure the actual change in sales in a certain area, and Burt scores, they call people on the phone and measure the memorability, how much people can remember a commercial. And these are the same people they made like Levi's commercials, and it scored very high. I don't know if it changed the sales of Levi's, but when people called up, they certainly could remember the commercials. But this detergent, they actually showed you the detergent, and they showed you clothes, and then they had it blow up. I mean, literally like a bomb sound, and then it would just go like this and wipe off the screen. And also, when people make images in their mind, if you stop for yourself and you think about it, you make an image of something that's pleasant. If you make it bigger and closer, your feelings get stronger. But if you were to blow it up, the feelings go away. There was a product called Formula 409, and the commercial for it, when it first came out, they showed this greasy wall, and they squirted this stuff on it, and then they did a super close-up. Now, in terms of being a commercial that affected sales, this was really powerful. Because when people magnify things in their mind and make really large images, it affects them kinesthetically very strongly. Now, if you stop, I want you to try an experiment. Just sit back. I want you to think about something that you bought and you are happy you bought, and when you think about it, you're just delighted. Okay? Now, just notice where the picture is in your head. Notice how big it is. Notice how close it is. And if there's sound with it, notice whether the voice, whether it's on the right or the left, does it sound like it's coming in or going out? And then stop and think about something you almost bought and didn't. And I'll ask you, are the pictures in the same place? By the way, this is yes and this is no, okay? Simple thing, we'll get through this part. Now the other thing is if you think about something, and we've all done it, where we bought something and it ended up in our garage. Closets. Some of us even have storage sheds filled with these things. These are what are usually called bad decisions. At the time, something, you know, something about it seemed right, but probably, if we'd have thought about it long enough, it's something we wouldn't have bought. I know that, you know, sometimes I'm an impulse buyer. I'm the worst person. I'm so hypnotizable. It's what made me learn about hypnosis so quickly. It's like it doesn't require sophisticated Milton Erickson techniques. All it requires is a shiny object, and I'm gone. You know. When I first met Milton, I decided that the best thing to do would be to be in the deepest trance I could possibly go in, because I thought I would learn the most. I later learned that hypnotists fight to stay out of trance. I don't know why, but for some reason they think that makes sense. But when Milton looked at me, he went, "This is this guy's waking state." Calibrated to it, and then began to do everything under the sun to try and put me into a deep trance. Now, I grew up in the 60s, and, you know, altered states were a way of life with us. You know, I was part of that generation where they told us every day in school that the world was going to end. They had us practice. You know, I lived in California, and you could see out of the windows there was Moffett Field and Ames Research and Lockheed and Fairchild. You know, I was at ground point zero. And some rocket scientists got the idea that it really made sense for us to practice being bombed by atomic bombs to give children a sense of security. So they would fire off. They had one thing for the school that's burning down and one for an atomic bomb is about to land. And and everybody would get underneath these little desks and put our hands over our heads for like 5 minutes and pretend that the world was ending. It's no surprise to me that as a generation growing up, most of us just went, well, fuck it, you know? Sure, I'll take one of those. Well, this makes me feel a lot better than getting under my desk and imagining the world is going to end. Now, I don't know who thought of this. I don't know if they're even still doing it in the U.S. You know, my kids are in their 30s now. But when my kids went to school, they did some very strange things. For example, my kids were sitting at home one day. I came home and I walked in, and they had bananas, and they were trying to put condoms on these bananas. And I mean, my kids were really young too. One was like in the 2nd or 3rd grade, you know, and he was trying to force this condom on the banana. And you know, and he said, "Dad," he said, "can you help me with this?" And I said, "Well, what exactly are you doing?" And he said, "Well, you know," he said, "they told us about women getting pregnant, and that if we put a banana with a condom on it, that the woman wouldn't get pregnant." And he said, "But I'm having trouble getting the condom on the banana." And I said, "Well, next time don't peel it first." Now, how that relates to sex, I'm not sure. But, you know, if you skin the penis first, then it's going to be very hard to get a condom on it, I guess. I don't know. But I went down and I said to this teacher, I said, I'm not really opposed to sex education, but I'm a little confused about having this little monument next to your bed. I said, because if I'd have put a banana next to my bed with a condom on it, I would have never had 2 children. And she said, no. She said, we just want them to know how condoms go on. And I said, but you don't want them to know what it goes on. And she said, well, not till they're older. And I thought, Jesus, this is as scary as the stuff they tell you when you're kids, you know. Like, think about Santa Claus, you know. That always frightened me, some fat guy coming down the chimney. I didn't even have a chimney, and it scared me. You know, I kept looking for the chimney in the house, you know, because it's in all the things. And that midnight slaying thing, I don't know, Freddy Krueger stuff. I didn't get the gist of the story, you know, because I was Jewish, and, you know, we don't really get into that thing. But, you know, I had my gun out every Christmas Eve looking for the motherfucker. Riot punch shotgun out the window. I didn't stop doing that till I was 50 either. But you see, when we sell stories that go with things, and to me, you know, that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to be able to change people's beliefs. Think of some of the things that psychiatrists actually tell you. For example, the reason you guys have mental problems. Do you know why you have mental problems? Because you wanted to fuck your mother. Now, I don't know about you, but I never really thought about my mother that way. Now, a psychiatrist would tell me, well, you just repressed it, you know, and I would say, if I ever had that thought, I'd want it repressed. You know, excuse me, but I think that's pretty weird. They didn't call him sick man fraud for nothing. To me, the fact that this is prestigious knowledge. Now, when I came along, I was a 23-year-old kid, and I decided the entire field of psychology was wrong. Hands down, flat out wrong, and decided to build my own field in which people could get better quickly. And people with phobias could get over them today. And, you know, and I had a strange approach to things. I didn't use the scientific method. I used an old-fashioned method. I asked. I put an ad in the paper and asked for people who had phobias and got rid of them without therapeutic intervention, and told them I'd pay them $100 if I could talk to them. And I sat down and I weeded out the ones that just were after money and didn't actually have the fears. Easy to test, by the way. One thing about phobias is you know they're there. But the same thing is true about people when they have desires for things, when they want to buy things, when they want to negotiate things. I mean, whether it was the stewardesses or the airline, they need each other. And that's the basic fact. And the question about, how they're going to end up and how well these people are going to work for them. And the process of how they negotiate their wages shouldn't be based on what's convenient at the time. And it shouldn't be based on what lawyers think they can get away with. It should be based on something that reciprocates so that the airline doesn't go bankrupt, and at the same time, the people have a good wage and also like working where they are. To me, I've gone in so many places with so many disgruntled employees, and I won't do business with them. I don't know how many of you have ever been in a hotel, and because I stay in them a lot. Some hotels you go in and they seem to have the same employees every year, and they're happy and cheerful. And some, every time you go, everybody there is different. They change personnel like they change clothing. I did a training program once for the Chart House, which owns Burger King. And when they laid out what their problem was, they said, look, we have a 200% turnover in management every 6 months. That's just horrible. And why is that? Because they're not paying them enough? I don't think so. I think it's because they make them feel bad working there. That when you make people feel really good, then, and you provide them opportunities so that they can continue to do better, that you'll get loyalty in exchange for it. I don't think it's a hard formula to figure out. But by the same token, when people, like one of the guys that has one of the franchises for McDonald's is very, very successful. Put it inside a hospital, good place for it. Children's hospital even. And it's also next to a college and all these other things, and the place is just swamped. It's almost as busy as the one in Moscow. And when the guy goes into work, right, when he goes in, he drives in a Rolls Royce. Gets out, he has a chauffeur, and he gets out, and he goes and walks around his hamburger stand, and the people look at that, and go, "Grr." Like that next thing you know, they're stealing money out of the thing and stuff, because instead of buying himself a cheap car to drive in and dressing like they do, the guy who opened up Oracle as software, put his office in the same place everybody else's. They all had cubicles, he just took a cubicle. Didn't need a big office to hide in because he wanted to run his company. And in exchange for that, he got great loyalty from people because he set a good example himself. I find that, it always amazed me that with clinicians, that how many of them, when I had in training seminars over the years, that the first thing I had to convince them of is that they could change before I could get them to try new techniques. And they would literally be embarrassed. I'd show them how to take 7 or 8 minutes and get rid of a phobia. And they'd say, well, I could use this with new clients, but I just can't walk into the clients I already have and use this technique. And I go, why not? You don't want to change and set a bad example for them? And they'd say, well, they'd want to know why I didn't do it before. And I'd go, oh, then you could tell them because you didn't know it before. I mean, it seems simple enough. If you look at somebody and you say, I'd like to try something new. I did training of headhunters. This is an interesting profession. What these people do for a living is steal employees. And the more valuable the employee, the more they're worth. And especially, in some very technical skills, and also, when you're talking about vice presidents and stuff, by the time somebody has run a particular part of a corporation, that the amount of investment to have somebody have the years of experience is valuable. Some people will not leave a company just based on money. It's surprising what they offered. There's one guy's an expert in some nonsense about floppy disks years ago. And the training company, we set up a thing where we put telephones all around in the room and we put loudspeakers. And I had these guys call the person that they were the least successful with. And they would always go, well, I'd like to tell you about somebody that I did a really good job with. And I said, you don't have to tell me about that. You already know how to do that. Let's take the hardest examples, and instead of looking at them as failures, let's look at them as the opportunity. Because if you can change your behavior and close this sale, then it opens up this whole wide range of things where you're going to be more successful more of the time. So when he called up this one guy, this guy was absolutely amazing. I've never heard anyone speak as slowly as this guy did. Because he called up and he said, my name's Fred Schwartz, and he said, I really wanted another chance to get a meeting with you to talk about this opportunity at this other company. And the guy said, well, Fred, I do appreciate your enthusiasm. And I said, tell him to hold. Tap, hit the hold button. I said to this guy, I said, you have to speak at the same rate this guy's speaking. Because people usually speak about the rate they can understand. And you can adjust it. all you have to do is start slow and then maybe speed up a little bit. But if you don't start where they are, if you don't start out matching their predicates, if you don't start out at the rate that they do, then they can't process the information and they'll just be agitated. So this guy, I said, no. Everybody, I said, nobody laugh, okay? And once they got over that, I passed out towels so they could put it over their mouth and pressed the button, and the guy got back in and he said, well, I would like another chance to speak to you. And the guy said, how about this afternoon? Just like that. Nothing was really different. The only thing that was different was the way the guy felt. His mind got scrambled. Actually, it turns out that the kind of machining and engineering he did had something to do with the thing that moves really slowly inside of a floppy disk. I don't know much about floppy disk, but he told me there's things that went through high speed and searched, and then there was slow searches for accuracy when they went through and do things. I don't know. Computers have changed over the years. When I worked on them a long time ago, they had flashing lights. I think computers should have flashing lights. You know, we all can relate to that from the old movies. But back in those days, we used to kill a tree every time we wrote a program because we had intelligence terminals, and they weren't very intelligent. They had X's and zeros, and you would type on these big white things, and a tree would spew out of the back of it. We had to keep them in buildings that were at like 0 temperature because otherwise the machine would freak out. So we used to have to wear big jackets and lots of socks. I even got battery-operated socks when I go to work because the floor was like ice, you know, because they had this sterile environment because they didn't want any dust. So we were inside this kind of clean room. This spare univac would be flashing lights along. And we would be trying to figure out how to get it to do something that a human could do. Now, one of the things over the years where I took the skills, because in those days we were designing compilers, that is computer languages. They had some, but they weren't very interesting. They had things like Fortran. Any of you who have ever studied Fortran know that really it's probably the best way to give yourself a migraine headache that exists. You could take human behavior and model it with it, but it's so complex that, you know, it's good for things like accounting, but it's not really good when you want to get into the kinds of things people use computers for now. I saw on television, they have a little computer that translates your dog's barking into English. Well, yeah, which must really confuse the dog, I would think, most of all. The dog goes, woof, when it goes, I'm hungry. And, oh, it's fascinating. My dog, I just got to understand what she was saying anyway, because, you know, she has different sounds for different things. I mean, just like humans do. Humans have different sounds that they make, even before they speak. They go, let's see. Now, I don't know how psychologists miss the thing about accessing views and representational systems and why it is that I found it, because I was just watching and listening. They claim to be observant, and they missed something this obvious. Because if somebody comes in and you're going to negotiate a contract with them, one of the things that to me is important is to realize that the way in which you package the very information that you give them, if you have only one way, if all you can do is say your name and comment on the blue marlin on the wall, there's only a certain number of people that can hallucinate that blue marlin, and therefore there's only a certain number of people you can sell to. On the other hand, if you can begin to understand the difference between the images you just made. Now, if you stop and you think there was the thing you wanted and you're totally delighted with, and the picture is in one place, literally point to it with your finger. Okay. Now, the thing that you didn't buy, okay, where's that picture? It's in a different place, isn't it? Now, is it a different distance? Different size? Does it have a border around it? Is it one a movie and one a slide? It makes a difference. Now, the process of becoming convinced itself becomes very important, because if you stop and you think, okay, now the things that were a good decision, okay, my good decisions are here, okay, and they're this big and they're like this. And the thing that was a bad decision and I didn't want it is over here. Now, what happens if you're a salesman and you go and you convince somebody of something, and then you sit them down at a desk and you slide the contract over here? What's going to happen? Suddenly, even though you were both on the same, tuned in together, you'd agreed upon everything, and you slide this thing in front of them, and suddenly you notice their face change. Go, well, maybe I should think this over. It's happened to anybody who's been in sales the last minute. When I discovered it was as simple as keeping that clipboard up here, I go, handy thing, a clipboard, because I would hold the clipboard up there in the right place. In fact, I discovered if I didn't have the product, sometimes I could show a contract or a brochure that just where I held it made all the difference in the world. In fact, if I held it at a certain distance and began walking closer and closer, there's a large percentage of the population that actually switched from being unsure to being certain, depending upon the distance of the images in their mind. Now, when I decided to take the skills of the things that I had done working with schizophrenics and psychologists, because people have always said to me, they said, you must have encountered such resistance from the field of psychology. And the truth is, I didn't. Because once I gave them things that actually worked, things they could try and do, and it actually had an impact, they became very good and loyal clients over the years. That psychiatrists sent me all these wonderful patients because I said that, I want to try other things. And they literally, I'd say, okay, I know what to do about phobics, but I'd send them a list. Can you send me depressants this week? And then the following week, I want people, who are obsessive compulsives. And because a psychiatrist told me obsessive compulsives are incredibly difficult to work with. And when I stopped and thought about it, I said, look, if somebody is compulsive, all you got to do is get them on the right track. And that the problem is that you're not asking them to be compulsive enough. Because, you see, all of the kinds of beliefs always collapse on themselves. People who are uncertain are sure about it. So when I get into a negotiation with people, I've negotiated with people and they come in and they go, look, I'm absolutely sure that there is no room for us in this deal. There's no way. I was negotiating with a magazine when I had an R&D company to make the magazine, the first one to have some holograms in it. And the people at the magazine said, look, they said, it's going to be too expensive. It's too radical of an idea. No one else has done it. And I just don't think that our board is going to be able to take this step and be first. We're not that kind of magazine. We don't have an image of being innovative, and our readers don't want innovations. And I said, and you're sure about this? And the guy goes, absolutely. And I said, well, then you should be sure enough to be unsure. And he went, well, yeah. And at that moment, I already had enough doubt to work with. Because as soon as he had that doubt, I said, well, then all we have to do, if you're absolutely sure, is to present it to them in a certain way, and then we'll find out that you were right, unless you're not. And I said, you wouldn't want to miss a really good opportunity. Or would you? Not. Because the conscious mind of human beings does not process negation. When I say, don't think of blue, bang, it comes into your mind. And so when you say to people things like, you say, I know that you're not ready for this, unless you are, then they have to consider it as a possibility. The more you work in the realm of possibility, the more you'd be surprised what people can convince people of. I've seen some pretty amazing things in my life. When I was young, I played in a band, and there were 3 white guys and 3 black guys in the band. And the black guys lived in a horrible neighborhood, and it was East Palo Alto. It was just a horrible ghetto. And one of them wanted to get his mother and his brothers and sisters out of the ghetto. And he said, but there's no way, he said, you make the kind of money that we make, that I can afford to live anywhere else. And I said to him, well, as far as I'm concerned, you can't afford not to live anywhere else. It's getting really dangerous here. People are starting to shoot each other. I said, what you really need to do is to convince, someone that they should let you live somewhere else for the same price you live here. It's got to be possible. I said, there has to be somebody out there. There are banks everywhere. They should be able to arrange this for you. This whole system is out there. And he said, but I don't have a credit rating. He said, I don't have a normal job. And I said, yes, but if you have imagination, you can create paperwork. That's what paperwork is. Paperwork is just imagination. Ask the people who are running Enron. Now, sometimes you can become a little too imaginative, but in the case, we tried doing things because, you see, all he had to do was to go in with the right attitude and with the right paperwork. So what we did is we created record contracts. I set up a record company and made contracts with him. And You know, maybe I couldn't live up to those contracts, but it was very convincing enough that he went in and he laid this stuff down, and instead of acting like a poor musician, I told him to have the attitude of a rock star. I mean, just imagine these guys that suddenly make $200 million, and last year they made 50 bucks. It happens all the time. It's got to do an attitude adjustment to you to suddenly discover that you can buy these things. Doesn't mean that you have a long credit history, but they can check your bank accounts. But really what they're looking at is what's your potential for the future. If you're going to buy a house over 30 years, it's going to be cheaper than if you rent one. As it turned out, he paid about half as much on a mortgage for a house than he did. Since he was a first-time buyer, they only had to put 5% down. Then all we had to do is get somebody to loan him the 5%. And I used the most powerful tool that I could think of at the time, guilt. You know who I got to loan him the 5%? The bank manager. Charge some interest on, it's fine, but, I said, would you stop these people from having a house when you're going to have somebody here who's going to be a loyal customer for years? Because banks hit a point where this funny thing happened, where when they deregulated them, for the first time, banks had to actually compete in business. When I was young, you used to go into the bank and you gave them money and they actually gave you interest back. It was amazing. It's totally different now. Money market account, you got 18% back. I mean, it was lovely. Even a passbook, you got 5%, but when you went in, the banks acted like, they were doing you a favor. I still think these ATM machines, I'm still pissed off they won't give me back my own money. They give it to me a little bit every day, I go up with my card and they go, oh, I'm sorry, you're over your limit for the day. You can't spend any more money today. I think that's crazy. If it's my money, I should be able to get it out. They go, no, you have to go during the day. You have to be in your hometown. You can't be out of state. But see, suddenly the banks found that they had to do ways where they had to do business. Now, we made a set of films some years ago. We went to what was a savings and loan at the time, and we made them a proposal. We said, look, you're in business and you're competing with all these banks. And my guess is if we just trained your bank tellers and your management people, and we'll do it with half-hour films. So we made a series of films, and all they were things where we taught people a little bit about pacing and leading. So if somebody came in and they were talking really fast, you talked fast instead of making them wait and get impatient. And then there was funny things I found out when I was in the bank, because when I was in the bank, some guy walked up to the bank teller and said, I'd like to cash this check. And she said, do you have an account with us? And he said no, and she said, well, then we can't cash your check. Next. And I thought, what a waste. I said, they want to increase their business. You should say, we can cash your check, but you need to open an account. And send them over to the other guy, open the account, cash the check, and probably you would end up adding more people. Now, the idea of people in a bank being nice to someone was totally foreign in those days. That now they start having commercials where they're going to be your best friend and know your name and all these odd things. I'm not sure I want a banker to know my name. I just want them to do what I ask, when I go in. The only person I want to know my name is the loan officer. So when I go in and say I would like to borrow some money, they go, oh, it's you again. Sure, how much do you need? Next time, don't bother coming in, just call. They do make mistakes, though. You have to check things. I borrowed $100,000 over the telephone one time when I had a credit line, and I told them to put it into my account. And the loan officer said, no problem, it's all the paperwork. Just come and sign the paperwork when you come in next week. And next week I went in and I signed the paperwork, and I went over and tried to cash a check, and it bounced. And I said, how could it bounce? You just put $100,000 in last week. And they looked at my account and they said, no. They said, yeah, you haven't got that much money. You only have like $5,000 in your account. And I said, well, I already had that. So I went back to the loan officer and I said, did you put the money in my account? He said, yes. And he went over and he pressed buttons and he said, it's gone. And I said, that was fast. This is before electronic transfers even. And they searched and they couldn't find it. And then suddenly my son came up to me at the end of the month. And he held out his little Christmas club and he went, wow, Dad, banking's really cool. Look how much money I got. And instead of having $11, he had $100,011. Now, it occurred to the banker when he was trying to figure out what was wrong. He kept looking for variations on my name, kept looking for everything but the obvious. Doctors do it all the time. They tell me all the time they have trouble convincing patients to take medication the way they're supposed to. that they give them antibiotics, they take them for a couple of days, feel better, and then stop. And then, of course, they get sicker. That even when they go to gather information from people, they don't know how to listen enough that they don't induce disorders. Because sometimes it makes sense to communicate congruently to build trust. Now, I know there's a lot of books that came out on rapport, and I'm the guy that brought this up years ago that said that if you need rapport, matching behaviors help. And if you start out, but I never said you had to stay there forever. I mean, to me, this is something you do for 2 or 3 minutes. It's not something you do for the rest of your life. That once you start matching predicates, you can expand. People's brains are very, very flexible. This guy who was talking to the devil, okay, he'd been in the hospital for like 3 years. He was under heavy medication. They took him all the stuff. And when his family hired me to see if we could do something about it, the psychiatrists were very resident. They said, look, you know, you want us to take him off of medication. And they said, he's just going to get crazier. And I said, he's crazy already. He's locked in a mental hospital. He's lost his freedom. He's lost his family. He's lost his job. What the fuck else can happen? And they said, well, he could go over the edge. And I went, he's already over the edge. I said, I just want to go over the edge with him for a while and see if I can't scare him back up on the ledge. And against their better judgment, they let me create my own little thing. So suddenly that night, he was laying in his bed. And suddenly the window bars opened on his window. I mean, the steel bars were on the 3rd floor, so I didn't think he was going to jump out or anything. I wasn't that worried about it. And although, you know, they were very concerned that we went in and made certain adjustments, especially the pneumatics that lifted the bed up and made it spin. And we put speakers on the walls of either room so we could, big subwoofers and stuff, big amplifiers so we could get a good mumbling devil voice, and put a reverb unit on it because you can't do religious figures without reverb. That's one of the technical things. And then out of the mist in the evening, in our little fog machine, we projected a hologram that I bought from Edmund Scientific, by the way, in New Jersey, of a big devil face with horns and his hideous face. And as it moved through the fog, it looked like the lips were moving, of course, because of the movement of it. And it was about 60 feet high, and you know, and so he said, Charlie, you know, the bed moves up and rumbles, and a few of the drawers slammed back and forth, you know, and Charlie was a little nervous, to say the least. He kind of tiptoed over to the window, and he looked out, and this hideous 60-foot thing in the fog, you know, and he went, Charlie, I'm really pissed off at you, and I've come to speak to you for the last time. Seemed like a good idea, a little presupposition there. And Charlie was schizophrenic, but not stupid, by the way. He looked out the window, and we had mics in there, so we knew what was going on. Had a little camera so we could watch. And Charlie looked out the window and goes, God, you look really different. And he goes, that's because I'm really mad. I said, you've been telling people about me. Every day you mentioned my name. What goes on between us should stay between us. Otherwise, you'll spend eternity in hell, having your skin stripped from your body slowly, feeling the tortures and the fires burning. Is that what you want, Charlie? And he went, no. And I said, then, well, he didn't know it was me. He thought it was the devil. Close, but not the same thing. I know there are many people that think I'm the devil, but he does work for me from time to time. But I think he's more scared of me than I am of him. I have too many crazy ideas. I would scare the devil. I'd go in and reorganize it, you know. I go, this is no way to run hell. Think of the fucking heating bill we've got. We could run this company much more efficiently. Let's put these souls to work. That's the thing. And the clothing, you know, because that whole thing in the Bible, it even says the whole thing was over dress code. You know, that Satan claimed to be more beautiful than, you know, than God, and so he kicked him out of heaven. It was kind of like a gay catfight in Castro, you know. Kind of hard for me to get really upset about that. I see on TV there are people, you know, all constantly building fear into people. The government is scaring the crap out of us these days, don't you think? I mean, you know, this Homeland Security really should be called the Homeland Insecurity. I mean, the fact is to say, we want you to feel safe, so we're going to break into your house and look at things when you're not home. We're going to arrest people. We're going to photograph and fingerprint everybody. And, you know, and we're really going to search inside of everybody's shoes. When I first landed in America, Mexico, they wanted nothing to do with my feet. But when I got switched planes in Texas, they said, well, take your shoes off. And I said, you know, and I had little tiny loafers, you know. It wasn't like I had big bomb shoes or something. I had little skinny loafers on. You know, I just came from Mexico. And I took my shoes off and I handed it to this guy, and I took it over to some big electronic thing and went in there and wiped the inside of it, you know, with something, and put it in a machine, and lights went off and on. And he went, "These shoes are non-explosive, you can have them back." And I started looking at everybody else's feet going, I wonder which feet blow up. It's just, you know, and then this warning alert thing, they come on, they used to just tell you the news, and then they started having smog alerts on there. They go, you know, old people should stay inside, like in LA, you know, they'll have smog alerts, so they'll say, you know, if you're going to go outside today, just don't breathe, okay? And now they have this orange, you know, it's like the terror alert. How much terror should you feel today? Right? I don't really need to know that, you know. Personally, there's not much I'm going to be able to do about it. Like, how much fear should I have in my body? See, I think, you know, that instead they should say, look, you know, it's being taken care of, you know, we've upped security. We decided to check to make sure there are no bombs on the plane. I think that's a good idea. I think, you know, that they should have electronic, but they want to go through my luggage and, you know, stuff. I just make sure there's lots of stuff there to entertain them. That's, you know, I like to bring like a big satanic books, you know, that sort of thing, you know. Look at them with that. They go, "What's this for?" And I go, "Because I put a spell on the plane for safety." And they always look and they go, "Are you serious?" And I go, "No." Once in 1964, I was serious, and it just made me feel really bad, so I haven't done it again since. I just discovered there, you know, if you try to get too serious, you get stupid, and there's lots of examples of that. Think about Donald Rumsfeld. There's a good example. Stuff they're worried about just blows my mind. And Arnold Schwarzenegger now wants to stop gay people from being able to get married. Like, this is really an important thing, you know. Excuse me, I may not want to live with another man and marry him, but if somebody else does, that just leaves more women for the rest of us. Doesn't really think like that's something we really have to worry about, you know. I mean, we've got terrorists trying to blow the planet up, you know, and people, nuclear weapons, where we don't know what, they're trying to figure out what to do with nuclear waste, you know. And anything that volatile couldn't really be that wasteful, you know. There should be a way of taking it and converting it back into energy. And in fact, somebody told me that there actually were ways of doing that, but the rules about the safety of nuclear waste prevented them from being able to do it. Because once you have too many rules, see, if our lawmakers had to get rid of 2 rules for every one they made, it would clear things up in a few years. But odd things, Newt Gingrich tried to get rid of the Clean Air Act. I mean, there's something I'm against, clean air, you know, and clean water too. He didn't approve of that either. I mean, tried to undo these things. Ronald Reagan was very suspicious of these things. You know, I remember him on television coming out saying that he was going to sign the Clean Air Act, although he was not really in favor of it. And to me, you know, like clean air and clean water seem like basic things that we shouldn't have too much trouble with. Nowadays, that, you know, they have all kinds of things in the works. That there was a guy on television who was totally upset because they haven't reopened the Statue of Liberty, so that people can walk up inside of it. You know, you can only look at it from the outside. And because they're afraid people will go inside it and put something in and blow it up, I guess. And so they would have to put equipment in the front so they could sniff everybody's shoes before you were allowed to walk up 3,000 steps. To me, but it would cost $5 million to be able to make it so that people could walk up inside this woman's skirt. And I just don't see what the fascination with this is, you know. I mean, it's, you know, there are places where you can do that for like $50. There are some places you can do it for like $1, you know. To me, that when people become fixated on these things and start, I mean, this guy talked about it as if it was a national disgrace. And I mean, he was violently upset. You could see him, and he was arguing with some other congressman who kept going, well, you know, he said, you know, we've allotted a bunch of money for parks this year, and maybe we'll do it some other time. And he said, well, he said, yes, but he said, millions and millions of people visit the Statue of Liberty, and just think, now they can't go inside it. He goes, that's a national disgrace. I think a national disgrace is the fact that we haven't focused on the things that give us freedom, especially the freedom to do business the way we want, and the freedom to be able to live the way we want. I mean, to me, you know, there's lots of things that I don't approve of in this world, But that doesn't mean that I think that everybody else should have to live the way I do. In fact, I wouldn't wish that on a lot of people, to be able to think of things. Now, I don't think people should be locked up for being crazy. I think if we're going to lock people up for being crazy, we should start with Congress. That would be a good place to start, and work our way sideways. To me, the fact that people have such violent and intense beliefs about these things shows me that we're not teaching our people how to think. In schools, when I started developing things for the educational system, one of the proposals that I did, I was young and idealistic, I have to admit. And so I went and got commitments from all of these real geniuses, people like Linus Pauling, Buckminster Fuller, all of these brilliant people to agree to come for 2 months a year and teach at an elementary school. I wanted to take young children and teach them how to read and write and do advanced math right away, and then expose them to things like how to do architecture and how to design airplanes and things about nuclear fission, like by the time they're 6 or 7. So to see if we could, create a curriculum that could be used not just in that school, but in other schools. At the time I lived in Hawaii, and the state of Hawaii said, no, I couldn't open a school like that. Even though I had commitments from all of these geniuses, they said these geniuses were not qualified to teach elementary school. And unless they all went back to college and got elementary school certificates. Now, when I found out what elementary school teachers learned, they learned to use the overhead projector. For example, they took a 3-month class on how to use the overhead projector and how to run one of those 16mm things, and then how to fill out a lesson plan book so that you could take something that you could learn in 15 minutes and drag it out for a year. See, when I discovered a quick way to teach kids to spell, and I took a whole bunch of educationally handicapped children. These were 5th graders, and I took all the 5th graders in the school district and put them in one room, sat them down and said, do you know why you're here? And they said, because we're dumb. And I said, that's right. I said, no, you're not just dumb, you're stupid. And I said, and I'm the stupidest person of all. So I'm going to have to teach you guys how to cheat and get away with it. And they all looked at me and they went, who are you? So I said, look, the problem is, when they give you spelling words and tell you to memorize them, I said, you guys, if you can't spell the words, you're writing them on the back of your hand and shit, aren't you? And they went, oh, yeah. And I said, that's no place to hide things. You have to learn to hide things in your head. And then I taught them, and I wrote the word color, and I made the C red, and the O green, and the L orange, and the next O blue, and the last R, depending on what country you're in. Like in England, they spell color differently. And they're very adamant about it, too. When I write the word color in England, they all get upset, because they put a U in that we don't use. It's color. And they have aluminium, and we don't either. And they get very, very fussy over there about little things, like about, they say that we don't speak English correctly because they're English. And I said, well, but, there are different dialects of English. I said, even in the United States, growing up in New York, it's not the same thing as growing up in Texas. I mean, you grow up in Texas, you're not allowed to move your teeth while you talk. Well, that's a mighty fine building you got up out of the house. They go to New York and they go, look at all those skyscrapers. But I mean, these things are to me, are teachable. I mean, you could teach somebody to go to Texas and sound like a Texan, but you try to teach people language in school, and kids with no prior degrees and no education learn to speak a language in a couple of years. And I took language when I was in high school for 4 years, so I can't speak a single word of it. Whenever I hear Russian, I see a pegboard and a set of headphones. And I can hear this teacher grumbling at me for not pronouncing things correctly. But she never told me how to enunciate them. When I taught these kids how to make pictures of words and then copy them down, suddenly they could spell the next day. And of course, teachers got all upset. I went to the principal and said I was doing something satanic. The supervisors of schools came in and started passing out copies of the New Testament. Like that would prevent kids from being able to spell, but once they could spell, it was too late. Even the system of phonetics isn't spelled phonetically. It's really Pahonics. Now, whoever decided to call it phonetics didn't take themselves seriously and had no sense of humor. They were going, we want children to have low self-esteem for years, so we're going to make them sound out words. I mean, how do you sound out the word caught? I mean, think about it, silent letters, these are like sneaky letters. GH, where does the GH come in caught? Well, it's been around for so long, we're going to keep it. That's not going to change, but you can't do it auditorily. And there are some tasks you can't do architecture unless you can visualize things, unless you can do a little math, that they'll remain standing. There was a bridge they built in Seattle, and apparently the architect didn't do his math very well. First time the wind blew, the bridge fell down. Very expensive bridge, millions and millions and millions of dollars. And, he says, I'm sorry, and then everybody sues everybody for years. But basically, in the end, it always comes down to the taxpayers picking up the bill, so they divvy it up amongst us. Savings and loan, what happened? They had a big crisis with that. And, I was watching the hearings of this. They were sending a few people to jail for a few years, punishing them, and I'm still going, what happened to all the fucking money? I mean, the money went, they loaned it against something, where's the collateral? If I went to the bank, if I don't think my house mortgage, they take my land away. Suddenly all of this disappeared into a vacuum somewhere in stuff. And to me, if you don't ask the right questions, then you can't head in the right direction. And if you start to ask yourself the question, what is it? You see, when you look at that thing that you bought and you're convinced of, let me ask you to do something. Make a picture in your mind in the same place of yourself leaving here in 3 days, being more confident, being able to suddenly motivate yourself easily. We're going to teach you things about how your brain works and how other people's brain works, because it's not enough to persuade other people. You have to start with yourself. You have to persuade yourself that if you have a few tricks up your sleeve, that you'll be able to change the way in which you speak, the speed at which you speak, the tone at which you use. Some people don't even know enough about English to know it comes in, that they know there are questions, there are statements, and there are commands. And it's all done tonally. So you can embed commands inside of language so that when you tell people, well, by now, you're probably ready to look at these contracts. It embeds the command, by now, by and by, you'll see, By and by, as we go through this, you're going to need this. I always like to start people off in things by asking them to think of something that they were absolutely sure they wanted, absolutely convinced was a good idea. And as they start to think about it, I interrupt them. And when they do, I go, excuse me. And when they look at me, I always make a marker right in the sky, just like Pavlov did with the bell. I mark it out so I can get that feeling back inside them. Human beings are incredibly responsive. Charlie, once the devil came and yelled at him. The devil said to Charlie, which was actually me that day, I was filling in for him. I said, I want you to look over on the table, and suddenly a light illuminated, and there was a huge book. And I said, Charlie, I want you to look at that book, and I want you to study my book, and I want you to spread my word to everyone every day. And if you ever mention my name again, you'll know where the hell you're going. And if you fail to carry out this task, I'll be back, and you won't. And he was shaken like a leaf, and he walked over, and he opened the book up, and it said, Century Life Insurance Sales Training Course. Charlie looked at it, began diligently reading the book. A week later, he left the hospital. The psychiatrist was really screwed up about it. He said, he just kept reading this insurance book. And I said, well, I have a friend at this insurance company who's agreed to give Charlie a job there. And I have a feeling Charlie's going to be really motivated. And the psychiatrist said, well, I don't think I can let him out of the hospital because he's in a state of denial. And I went, denial? And he said, yeah. I said, I keep asking him about the devil, and he claims he's never spoken to him. And I said, but isn't that what you wanted? You kept telling me there was no devil, so he couldn't be talking to him. And now he's telling you there's no devil, and you're not happy. I said, what does it take to please you, for God's sake? And he goes, yeah. He goes, but I think he's just saying that. And I said, well, what do you care? I said, what, he's going to pretend to be normal? And he said, well, he said, what happens if he relapses? And I said, well, I have a feeling something will take care of that. I said, maybe I'll visit him at his house. I said, he doesn't have to live in prison. And he goes, well, you know, he may not know how to function in the outside world because he's been here for 3 years. And I said, well, that's kind of comment on your work, not mine. I said, if you're taking away his skills, his social skills, his ability to interact, I have a feeling he's going to do quite well on the outside. In fact, for some 23 years now, he's been one of the top salesmen. He went back with his family, even got back with his wife. He's very, very committed. And, you know, he even does training and trains other people. I don't think he explains to them why, but he keeps telling people this is the most important thing on earth. It's having insurance. Boy, he's up at the crack of dawn, he's out there, you know, and when he tells people about it, he puts his whole soul into it, one might say. I mean, people really listen to him, because if you yourself don't have enthusiasm, if you yourself are not powerfully convinced of things, then you're not going to be very good at what you do. And it's not something that just happens to you. It's not like, you know, a lot of people say, well, you know, some things I really like doing and some things I don't. But where do you think that comes from? Just think about the things people do for fun. Do you know people jump out of airplanes for fun? I mean, it's not even broken. They just go, hey, it's Tuesday. Let's go up and jump out of an airplane and watch the Earth plummet towards us at an ever-increasing speed, you know. And we'll take 2 parachutes just to be careful. Well, every once in a while, some people get so excited they forget to bring the parachute. I mean, it happens. I was in San Diego. They even showed it. This guy was filming, but his video camera, he put the tape in the video camera, forgot to put the parachute in the bag. And he forgot that extra chute, you know, the one screwed up chute. He didn't even bother with that one because he had his camera case there. And he was filming the Earth and filming the other skydivers. And you can tell the moment at which his mind produced that phrase, oh shit. Because the camera goes like this, and goes, looks all over like, you know, what can I grab a hold to? And at that moment, it's way too late. Some things require planning. And, you know, jumping out of an airplane, that requires a little planning. See, fishing is a little safer because it's really more up to the fish than the person. This is one of the reasons why I consider fishing the kind of sport that I'm into. You put the stuff out behind the boat, and the fish has to find it. You know, I mean, if the human had to chase a boat and find the hook, it would be more challenging, I think. But it's really up to the fish to find things. I was here in Florida some years ago, and another NLP trainer took me out on his boat. We went out into the Gulf, and we went out there, and we set lines out, and I was looking over there, and I was chanting incantations. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm trying to give the fish a hint. And he said, well, I just heard on the radio that bad weather is coming. He goes, we need to go back in. And I said, okay. I said, are you going to reverse the course? And he looked at me and he went, course? And I said, yeah, of course. I said, what course did we come out on? And he went, I don't know what you're talking about. I only took 2 boating lessons. And I said, well, you should have taken this one. I said, how do you know which way to go? And he said, well, I just turn around and go the other way until I see some land, and then figure out whether I'm north or south. And then sometimes, you know, because you could, depending on the angle, you could get pretty far off. I happened to have looked at the course, so I had an idea, so I turned around, and as we went back in, we went right into the harbor mouth. And he was like shocked. And he said, well, how did you do that? And I said, well, if you look at where you were, then getting back there is not that hard. And with human beings, there's very, very familiar things. That the examples, and I want you to pick in your mind, there's kinds of people that you don't do well with. And I want you to pick in your mind 1 or 2 of those right now, because we're going to use them as a gauge as we go along to find out how the flexibility in your behavior makes it so that you look at these people not as trouble, but as food. When you can look at the same image, if you think about the last time you were with this kind of client, some of us have clients that when they come over, that's when they knock on the door and you find out who it is. Something inside you goes, oh, fuck, you know, not again. I used to have a psychiatrist that was absolutely beyond the understanding of me of how stupid a human being could be. He brought me close to 100 clients, sat there and watched me work with them, and still couldn't figure out what to do. He would call me on the phone over and over again and go, what were the steps for that phobia thing? And I go, I wrote the fucking things down for you. He goes, well, I have it here. He goes, but I just can't, I don't see how this relates to this phobia. As if one fear is different informed. He goes, well, you know, when you gave me these steps, it was for a fear of snakes. But this person's afraid of heights. And when I go, what's the difference? And he'd go, well, one is a high place and one is a snake. And I go, yeah, but they're both fear. And he'd go, well, yeah, of course. Because he'd go, snakes really scare me too. And I go, well, we're not talking about you. We need to, but we're not. I go, what you need to do is to start thinking about it's what goes on in the human being. Because when we look at a client and we go, this is not possible, really what we're saying is the list of things I know so far won't work. So therefore, what else is there? Now, with some of the clients I've had over the years, I've discovered that just varying my behavior strangely produced results. Over the years, I've developed tools so that we can hone in a little quicker. But I mean, when I went to this furniture store, these guys told me that certain things were absolutely impossible. And believe me, I've been over people's houses and seen their furniture, so I know that it's possible to sell anything. I remember going over one of my friend's houses in San Francisco and walking inside this place, and he spent $1 million and bought this penthouse and decorated it himself. That was the mistake. And when I went in, it was all I could do just to keep from being blinded by the colors. He decided to paint his walls orange and to have purple carpets and bright red couches and lime green tables. He took beautiful wood tables and painted them lime green. Really strange, you know. I think, well, he was a bass player, what can I say? He's the same guy that went in my medicine cabinet one day and swallowed half a bottle of pills and then asked me what they were. He didn't have a really good decision strategy. He had a real problem with drugs till God came and talked to him one day, and I didn't even set that up. But he was in my bathroom, and I saw him taking pills, and I said, what the hell are you doing? And he said, well, he said, I just thought I'd try some of these. And, you know, this was in the late 60s, and, you know, and he said, what are they? And I said, well, actually, they're my girlfriend's birth control pills. I said, so you're really not going to have to worry about being pregnant. I said, you might get cranky once a month, but, and you might need to increase your bra size, but his ability to make decisions. Now, I know that people have different tastes, and that's the important part. The important part is being able to find out what you have that fits in. And to me, whether you're negotiating, whether you're giving instructions to a patient, I have medical doctors all the time that tell me that they have patients that, you know, that they give them drugs and they won't take them, and then they give them drugs and tell them not to take too much of it. And, you know, and I said, well, what exactly do you say to them? And I said, well, you know, she's an elderly woman, so I explained to her, I said, look, if you take one of these pills every 4 hours, that'll keep your pain gone. If you take more than that, you know, you're going to become addicted, become addicted, become addicted, become addicted. It's like a hypnosis thing. And as you look at these pills, you'll want more. And, you know, and then they write on the side, don't mix these with alcohol, because you may feel drowsy. And of course, people who have insomnia would go, well, that sounds like a good idea. So they'd take a couple of pills and a couple of shots and a couple more pills and a couple more shots. And they'd end up in the hospital, you know, having their stomach pumped. And the doctor would say, why did you do this? I told you not to. And they'd say, well, yeah, but you wrote on the bottle, it says right here that I could get better night's sleep. And yeah, you could get a permanent night's sleep. But you see, when they gave instructions to these people, they were faced with something. The doctors have to do this funny thing. They have to tell you what the worst that can happen is, because the insurance companies have passed laws. And this is all about lawsuit liability. So doctors feel like they say, well, you know, there's a 30% chance this will happen. I've been diabetic, and when I was in the hospital, they came up and they gave me pamphlets. And the first pamphlet they gave me was about how my toes were going to fall off. And it was horrible. It was all the bad things, and how you could get heart disease and how your veins would harden. I mean, as I started reading this thing, and it said, you know, it was just terrible. So, you know, and I'm sort of half out of it anyway in the hospital, and, you know, and they're telling me all these horrible things. And, you know, they told me to read this carefully. Fortunately, it said that, you know, this happens, you know, 7 out of 10 times. So I decided to be one of the 3. And so I gave her back the pamphlet, the doctor. I gave it back. I said, okay. I said, I've made my decision. And she went, what decision? I said, well, I'm going to be one of the 3. The 7 are going to have a hard time. I'm not into it. Especially with the second pamphlet, which said that 80% of diabetics become impotent. And I said, I'm going to be one of the 2. The hell with this. And she said, well, you don't get to choose. And I said, you should have told me that before I read the pamphlets. I said, too late now. I said, I feel bad for the other 7 guys, but not me. I'm not going for it. And the 8 guys, well, I'm sorry. This was before Viagra. You know, the hell with that. And she absolutely believed that this was outside of your control. That, you know, I've seen people do things. When I was in India, when I worked for the government, they brought this gentleman over from India, and they had this guy, and this guy actually grew a cancerous growth on his hand in less than an hour, and then made it go away. And they even tested biopsy, and it was malignant. And he could do this at will. Now, I don't know why anyone would learn this. It falls in the same classification as spoon bending. I don't have a real need to bend my spoons. You know, I mean, all these people that said, oh, God, you got to see Uri Geller, he can bend spoons. And I said, give me a pair of pliers, I can bend anything. A pair of vice grips, I can bend pipes. And they said, no, he can bend spoons with his mind. And I thought, you know, of all the things in the universe to do, you know, with your mind to learn to do, he thought there and he went, that spoon is way too straight. Now me, I'm a more practical guy. I like things that you can take and things that you can use. Now if you go back and look at the picture I asked you to make, can you put it in the same place? Let me tell a little trick. Make the picture like just out here in a random place. Make a picture and see yourself being more confident. See yourself being self-motivated. See yourself being more relaxed and having a wider range of choices. And then take the picture and move it way off into the distance and snap it right up into the same place of the thing that you bought, the thing that you're happy with, and the thing that you're delighted with. Because I promise you this, if you try the things that we're going to ask you to do here, the worst that can happen is your job will get easier and you'll get more wealthy. And you'll have a lot more sex. Because that's kind of a persuasion thing too, if you think about it. I know that people are constantly coming up to me and going, well, you know, when I want to have sex, my husband doesn't want to have sex. And when he wants to have sex, then I don't feel like it. And I thought, God, how did you work that out? Seems like you should be able to get the timing a little bit better. But most people don't do it by communicating in a way. They instead think, this isn't going to work. I know that a lot of couples, they sit down and they go, and their husband's coming home, they go, well, you know, he's going to come in, he's going to be too tired, he's not going to want to take me out to dinner, he's not going to want to do anything. When he walks in the door, she looks at him and goes, and he goes, what? And she goes, well, I know you're just going to want to sit on the couch. You can see this coming, can't you? Because you're going to be too tired. And he'll go, yeah, tired. She goes, go ahead. Just ignore me. He goes, okay. Now this just means he's obedient. You're just giving the wrong hypnotic commands here. You know. Now, I've seen some funny things. Like, for example, women will come in and they'll be dressed beautifully. And they'll hold up an empty dress and ask a man which he likes best. And men will think about it. Pick the one with the woman in it. Okay? Because probably you're not a fashion designer. And maybe they just want you to compliment them. And they're being as blunt as you can imagine. But guys aren't really that bright about this sort of thing. I've been over people's houses and women come out, you know, and I was with my wife and we were going to go out, 4 of us to dinner, and this woman comes out with an empty fucking dress and says to this guy, which one do you like the best? And he'll go, well, I could remember you wearing that red dress. That red dress does look really good on you. The whole fucking evening's fucked after that. You think this guy's gonna have sex that night? No way. Probably not for a month or 2. Especially if she puts on the dress and then comes out and says, which shoes do you like the best? And he looks at the empty shoes and the ones on her feet, and once again picks the empty shoes. Now, you know, if you keep that stuff up, you're going to be wearing the dress and the shoes after a certain number of years.